Very important question. I'm just going to go for the 3 questions because of time. So Zena.
Thank you all very much. So I'm going to be sneaky here and ask 2 questions. One question, Niels, you mentioned this idea of the forum shopping that happens, right? Where if you find that there isn't something you like, then just start your own and so on. And I wonder if you or the other panel members might say something about how that might be, that sort of proliferation might be controlled, and if it should be, controlled. My other question is around net neutrality, which seems to me to be one of the kind of front lines of this this corporate encroachment on the technical, Maria, that you talked about. And I wonder if the panel could just share some of the recent work that they're involved with or know of that might stem the tide, as it were.
Okay, so which human rights are we talking about exactly? Corporate responsibility in the final question, and then I'll throw it back to the panel.
So I have 2 questions, and as a computer scientist student, I guess I'm coming from a technical perspective, but in regards to registering domain names, is it something that you monitor in regards to the IP address that is the activity from the IP address on it, or you're just specifically monitoring, I guess, the names that are registered? And then the other question I had was .onion routing and just .onion sort of networking generally. Is there monitoring of that, or is it really just sort of surface domain names? And I don't know, I guess like, yeah.
Before we answer, could you just explain what you mean by monitoring?
I'm not sure. Is there surveillance of activity on .onion websites, or is it sort of, you know what I mean?
Not biased.
Not biased. You know what I mean? I have no idea. Like,
okay.
And just coming from a technical perspective, I'm just curious.
Okay, it's a good question. And who's watching who and where? So is that kind of, okay, so we've got, I think it's a nice range of questions. We've got the human rights one, the institutional, corporate one, and then the really techie one.
And .onion, I guess, networking generally, and if there's any access to that.
So, thank you very much. So let's have some brief responses to the questions in order from Kate about which human rights are we talking about and where do they figure at all substantively?
So which human rights? I'm going to talk about ICANN. So we have now a bylaw which says that as a core value, ICANN in its mission and operation shall respect human rights as required by applicable law. So basically, I mean, because international conventions are not applicable to ICANN, they are applicable to governments only. So what we are now trying to achieve is just to interpret this. And for me, just for me, because international conventions are not applicable, there are 2 aspects of this. So ICANN as organization, how it operates, because it's a legal body incorporated under the US law. So I mean, it would be in the US law, like if they're going to be engaged in slavery, you know, or I don't know, human trafficking or whatever, or violations of privacy where they would be responsible, they will be held responsible. Another thing, and much more important for me at ICANN, is how this bylaw influencing policy that the community is making. And that's where we believe human rights should be taken into account. And that's where probably applicable law in the EU would be taken into account, because if this policy will affect EU countries, we have to take into account like what is going on in Europe or somewhere else. But there was a big fight, for example, between Niels and I, because when we just started interpreting these human rights by law, there are Mark mentioned Ruggie principles. What are Ruggie principles? It's UN guiding principles for business and human rights. So the point was that some people at the community say that why don't we just commit to Ruggie principles? Because Ruggie principles are very famous. There are many businesses who have committed to them. But for example, in my opinion, and Niels might disagree with me, in my opinion, Ruggie principles were developed for businesses with, you know, supply chains. So, or when you, as I don't know, Primark, try to produce something in the country using child labor, you know, or you got to know that your contractor is doing something, violating human rights, you can terminate the contract. With ICANN, it will not work, for example, for one simple reason. When we are talking about registration of country code top-level domain name, like for example .in for India or .de for Germany, imagine that you are registering the country code top-level domain name for a country which is really violating human rights, which under the sanctions, like for example Iran. And then some human rights activists are coming with, lawsuit against ICANN and saying you have to terminate. According to Ruggie principles, you have to terminate your contract or memorandum of understanding with this contractor because you have to provide a remedy. So in a way, Ruggie principles, in my opinion, create a significant legal risks for ICANN. So if we are talking which human rights we are going to use, it really will depend on the policy. If we are talking about who is, for example, or like the information about someone who registered the domain name. Right now the discussion is how general data protection regulation in Europe is going to influence this. And this is where community is going to make policy. They are going to look at different laws in different countries and try to make policy which will be in accordance with applicable law. At least that's how we imagine this. But right now we will leave it up to different policy-making bodies within ICANN, within community, for country code top-level domain names, for generic top-level domain names like, I don't know, .London or .Berlin, to decide how they will actually implement human rights considerations into their policy-making procedurally.
So that kind of responds a little to your question, Zina, but I think both Niels and Jean-Jacques have responses to Kate's point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think what Tatjana is doing is a very negative interpretation of the Ruggie principles, and I think it's very typical for like a lawyer view where people think about risk and not about responsibility. Because I think that what the Ruggie principles say is that you should take responsibility for your contractors. Why was this done? Because, for instance, H&M was buying their clothes from a company in Bangladesh, and they said, we didn't make those clothes, it's not our responsibility. So we went through this process with the banks, through this process with the extractives industry, with the garment industry, and now it's up to the IT industry to also really understand what their impacts on human rights are. And to be frank, and this is why it's such an interesting discussion, we do not know. And this makes the enforcement of human rights in IT so hard. And that's why often people are offering blanket statements like, take down the whole network. So to come with more granular policies, we need to understand what the different parts of the infrastructure are doing. And that's why I think it's crucial that we start doing human rights impact assessments for all companies and all parts of the infrastructure. And human rights impact assessments are not only important because they are reports, but I've been developing now human rights impact assessment roughly. We've been playing a bit with it in ICANN, we've been playing a bit with it in the IETF, and it's very much a process where people come to the understanding, well, if I make this choice, you have this impact, if I do that, it has this impact, and thereby you're creating awareness so that for an engineer can integrate it in his work. And it's not only left on the lawyer who thinks about the risk for the company in the end, right? So it's kind of bringing back the public responsibility and the public interest in engineering. And and I understand Tatjana's point, I have to actually acknowledge that, because we do have distributed roles, and we do not want one group to be responsible for everything, because we also want to compartmentalize it tightly. But the Ruggie principles do not say, if you're having a contract as a human rights abuser, then you seek to address it. And it doesn't mean you need to cut the contract. So, but that's a bit of a detail. And if I can directly skip to the technical question and directly try to address it, like, I'm going a bit techie, I hope we can nerd out a bit. Like in the, when resolving DNS addresses, normally the DNS requests are sent in clear text. So, and there are, for instance, in the IETF now is a new standard on DNS privacy, in which that is standard use with TLS. But other stuff like DNSSEC, which has been around for 15, 20 years, hardly any deployment. And that is super sad, because that would just make the internet much better. And there are many of these IPsec, and well, luckily we now have opportunistic security in HTML2, but still the implementation of these things that we've standardized doesn't automatically mean that everyone will simply do it. So we can all come up with beautiful solutions, but it doesn't mean automatically in this distributed architecture it happens. And that's, so there are things there. When it comes to onion routing, I think it's definitely still the best we have, but what I'm still super sad about is that it's happening at the application layer. I wish we could start to work with that in the routing area and try to scale that, but that's really a question of resources. We need your brains, we need your code, we need to work on it, and that's why we need more public interest technologists in these areas.
Thanks so much. And now Tatiana and Jean-Jacques want to keep responding. In terms of which human rights, the prevalent ones are freedom of expression, privacy, freedom of expression, privacy. Yet, of course, we know there are many access, many more. Yeah, exactly.
There are many human rights.
And there are at least 4
right
generations.
Culture,
yeah, right. Yes. Education, women's rights, development rights. So it's
rights to property, for example.
rights to property. So
yes, intellectual property as well.
Social and cultural rights.
And sometimes they really have to be balanced. Yeah. Because if we are talking, for example, about freedom of expression versus copyright.
Well,
but anyway, so Tatiana,
yeah, I would like to briefly reply about Ruggie principles, because I think that just blunt commitment to Ruggie principle misses the point. It's like using the hammer when you need a drill, because the most risks from ICANN are coming not from the operational side. I don't believe that ICANN is going to be engaged in slavery or child labor, where risks to human rights are coming up in the community policy making, which Ruggie as an instrument which tackles organizational behavior is not able to address. And this is why I wasn't negative against Ruggie. I was just afraid that if we are committing to Ruggie, we say, okay, we've done the work. No, we didn't done the work. Because we have to address how the community, not the org, is making this policy, because once it's made, it's too late when it violates human rights. Once it's implemented, it's too late to do this human rights impact assessment on the organizational level. And this is why I really wanted ICANN to tackle this part, this very important part, and not just, operational, whom we have contracts with.
Okay, thanks. I think Jean-Jacques.
I agree with Tatiana. Yeah, she has made a good point. I think the human rights principles that we're trying to get ICANN to submit to or subscribe to are mostly at the organizational level, but the policy level is completely different, layer, a different game. I think there would be a lot of challenges to sync, the policy on an internationalized platform like the internet to be applicable on different countries, because different countries have different laws. And we can't, unless you have a case of the Union, like the European Union, you have data protection laws, and it's quite unified. But if you want to talk about the Middle East or Latin America or other, regions, it will be extremely challenging, to apply ICANN, policies on these countries. And I think there will be a little bit of a battle there, but I don't think we reached that point yet. I think we're trying to see if there is a way to suggest generic, policies that are more or less in line with human rights standards. And I think maybe not the easier way out, but the logical thing to do is to subscribe to the existing international standards, in addition to, the Ruggie principles. Otherwise, I think it will be a legal challenge, to get ICANN on that boat, in my opinion.
That's really the wider point I wanted to make, which is the sort of general question that we get when we talk about the internet. It's a tool that's inherently global and transnational, what ICANN does is of a global nature. And yet, even before Niels did his forum shopping to try and get human rights stuff at ICANN or ATF, etc., we had something in the bylaws, the statutes of ICANN, which said, I remember it's bylaw 1.4, which said basically that all our policies and procedures had to respect locally applicable laws. We had it before. And that should include human rights as well, right? So even before we went into the detail of looking at what human rights, I think it's helpful that we've gone into the detail and we're trying to frame it and make sure that in our policy development in particular, we're a bit more specific about how we take human rights into consideration. The fact is we've been bound to produce policies and procedures which should respect human rights and other applicable laws ever since ICANN started. But that is the problem. If we now focus on human rights, well, what is an international human rights standard? The best we have at truly international level is the UN. And I remember when I was in the private sector, we had a group, there's a group called the GNI, Global Network Initiative, that's doing some decent work with various organizations from civil society, but also the likes of Google, Microsoft, etc. And they came to see my company and said, do you want to join? And basically committing to sort of good human rights standards. And we looked and we realized, well, they're using the UN human rights standards as the basis. We were a Europe-based internet company. I'm like, well, we're under the European Declaration of Human Rights. We're actually far further than in terms of good human rights standards than the UN. We don't need to abide by this because we're already upholding a much higher standard. And I think we are getting to, to this situation increasingly where it's not exactly that we're coming into conflict, but I think the level of global standards versus regional standards versus country level standards is a real issue. It's a minefield. I don't have the silver bullet. I don't have the answer. We're going to have a lot of doing and froing. The good thing is, thanks to the good work that these guys are doing, we're getting closer because we're starting to try and put together frameworks which help us interpret our policy development and hopefully be able to have something that works at global level but is compatible at country level. We're still going to have the edge cases like countries with unsavory regimes, etc. We're going to be in conflict with those, but we're slowly getting there, and that's also why you need to be involved, because we're at a really important moment where we're really we're grappling with the effects of globalization and making them reality and making them cope with the local realities, national realities, and we need a lot of brain power here to help.
So you can see there are already intentions that are historically inherent. Historically inherent.
If I could just get a word there as well. So we're at this really weird historical moment where companies and corporate power and technology firms in particular are surpassing the power and the capabilities of governments. And so what we're seeing here in a way is the application of human rights, which used to be the job of governments, right? Human rights are there to constrain government acts. And so now, because much more of our lives are being lived effectively in, with and around technology firms and around the world, we're almost experiencing a category error where, hang on a sec, you want me, I'm a technology firm, to do human rights, or I'm a weird Californian hybrid non-profit that does internet stewardship, you want me to do human rights. That doesn't make sense to me. But actually, as the internet is pervading every part of our lives, and as the ownership structures of it are, they are what they are, but we're having to use different types of instruments to basically mediate an ongoing power struggle between citizens, corporates, and the state. And that's sort of why we're sort of in this slightly strange moment.
Thanks very much. Tatiana?
Yeah, I would like to comment on the point Maria made and Jean-Jacques made in a way. Because if we are talking about which standards we are applying, the international human rights standards are not applicable to private companies, full stop. Private company can commit to Ruggie principles. And this is why we are always talking about applicable law. Because if you operate in Europe, the human rights standards would be in applicable law of your country. And this is why we couldn't just say, you know, ICANN is going to commit to universal declaration of human rights, because it just doesn't make any sense. And this Article 4 of the Articles of Incorporation of ICANN, which told that ICANN is going to operate, you know, within international standards and whatever. The problem is that if you're talking about universal declaration of human rights, it is just a declaration. It's not applicable to ICANN, and anything who would argue against this will bring a big argument. And this comes to Maria's point. There is a legal terra incognita here, because international instruments are not applicable to private companies, but some of the governments don't want or have no idea. So we are existing in this land where citizens can push for this, where community can push for this, and we are coming to ICANN, IETF, and other fora, and we try to fill in this gap.
Okay, now I'm just taking. Oh, can you hear me? Am I on now? I'm just taking a bit of a time check. I think Mark, because I wanted, before we go on, I wanted Mark to have the right to respond.
Yeah, I triggered something here, I realize, in terms of the Ruggie principles. Perhaps I should just clarify that this is an exploration, really. I mean, the Pillar 2 of the Ruggie principles applies to corporate businesses. That's the focus of our interaction with the UN working group. And it's not a case of simply translating that easily into the ICANN environment. It's not going to work, really. But we have to find some source, really, that's going to help define how the rights commitment in the bylaw is going to be interpreted. That's what we're doing, and you know, there's no harm in that. And I don't think governments are not going to commit or try to force anything on the ICANN community. Let's work as a community to actually flesh out the commitment, and that's what the aim of the interaction is.
Okay, now I'm afraid I didn't put the Ruggie principles on your reading list, but it's not difficult to find. Ruggie Principles by John Ruggie, 2011 or was it
2011, and they are like, we used to have the UN Global Compact, which you know from the term corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility was have an oil spill, build a school, you're good.
You said it really well.
Yeah.
Which company were you?
I'm Dutch, so, but British Petroleum and Shell have done good things in the past. And so, but the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights attempted to address this, because there was then this understanding that multinational corporations just changed jurisdiction and were that way just escaping justice, right? So, and that's how we came up with that. And right now we're kind of seeing how this molds with the internet, because the internet itself is a jurisdiction problem, which is not necessarily dissimilar, right? So if I'm in country A, my attacker is in country B, and my server is in country C, and it's routed via country D. Like, to which jurisdiction, to which court should I go, and how do I get my remedy, and how many? Yeah. Well, Tatjana can explain that stuff.
Go ask a lawyer. No.
But the cool thing is that, so we're here with people from the private sector, civil society, lawyers, technologists, and we all say we don't really know how this works, but we're going to work it out. And that is so much fun. So I worked in different environments, and in every sector you will end up with people that are a bit like yourself. And that is just so boring. And the cool thing of internet governance is that you work with extremely smart people from a lot of different sectors, from a lot of different countries, and you're working on really hard problems that no one has solved it, and you fight so hard, and it's so much fun. So that is my pitch.
I feel like we're sort of advertising for a religious sect or something.
We are.
The traveling circus.
It's the term under construction, I think, is very much the operative term.
There was a question about forum shopping.
Yes, I think what I'd like to do is just get a few more very brief questions so that we can then have Sean kind of sort of, you know, I'll introduce Sean briefly, because we're running out of time and the white wine's getting cold, and I'm a white wine snob and I want my white wine cold. So,
It's getting hot.
and also, I hope you're starting to see some of the sort of issues that are coming up. Just a range of questions from the floor or comments. Very brief, up the back. Is the mic still around? Is that good? 1, 2, Raid, 4. Have I got any answers on 4? 5. Okay, brief please, go. I'll give Sean time to prepare.
Obviously this is a public problem, this is something that requires the public to have a discussion about. How do you increase public engagement? Through media, through arts? What do you think is the best way we can, address the general public about these issues? Because most people really have no idea what any of this is about. And nothing's going to happen unless you get a large majority of people to get on board. So how do we do that?
Thanks. Okay, that question, that's a good one. Next one. Number 2. How do you engage the public? I think Ananda has something to say about that. Oh, wait, not yet, not yet.
Cedric Knight from GreenNet. He would like to spend more time on the policy. Good. One thing was to actually explain the neutrality of the engineers. Is that obviously people are working in this area naturally want people to communicate, so there is an implicit human right in what people have traditionally been doing for the most part. When it comes to governments, I just wanted to say to Tatiana that human rights don't adhere in governments, they adhere in human beings. So it's up to other non-governmental actors to be involved as well. But I wanted to ask a question about accountability, really, both corporate and governmental. And I think Jean-Jacques described these as edge cases. How do you stop governments doing things like stockpiling vulnerabilities, shutting down the internet like in Cameroon? What kind of pressure can go on there? And then also in terms of corporations, and Maria talking about duopolies, oligopolies, at what point does an entity become so big that it's got an editorial responsibility? And to tie all those things together, it's sorry, it's a little bit vague, but you're getting governments are now increasingly expecting us to be censored by artificial intelligence. This is the way these things going in the last year. And so how do you actually, I suppose if the last question was communicating with the public, how do you communicate the needs for human rights to corporations, international and national?
Thanks very much. And before we finish with the last 3 questions, these questions I'm not going to expect the panel to answer, but these are the burning questions you're posing.
I'm thinking that's a program of seminars for the
There's
next
a program
12
of
months,
seminars.
every 2 weeks.
If anybody's tweeting just for me, could you just take a note of the questions, because we need to come back to them. So not so much for the tweet walk, but just for me, because I can't take it all in. But both very good questions. Lovely to hear from GreenNet, who've been around for a very long time doing great work at community level. Yay. Okay, next 3, and then who was it next? I think it was Raid. Can we get the mic? Zena, can you pass it to Raid? And who are the other 2 yet to come? Good, okay. Keep it brief. Yep.
Yeah, my question is to Niels regarding the Internet Engineering Task Force, RFCs, and whether you think that maybe designing these protocols and the RFCs in a certain way that could serve maybe the principles of the human rights standards. So do you think this is something that can, and this is something that can serve the principles of the human rights standards or not? And if so, what are things maybe you are doing or your organization is doing, such as what, for example, the IPv6 or not? And the reason I was just thinking about this is because when you mentioned that technical means political, I was thinking, is this true? Maybe if it's more true in a certain phases and less true maybe in a certain phase, such as in specifically we are talking about design and implementation and standardization. For example, if there's a protocol, an internet protocol has been standardized, this can maybe inform a certain functions and technologies that can be developed whether by governments or the cooperative companies or so. So this is just a certain phase and how, for example, it could be possible, or maybe my argument, if some of the work at the design and the standardization level will be more important, maybe beyond this. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And the next two comments, keep that in mind, big question. Who's left? There were two more, still had someone from the audience? Ah, yes, that's right, thank you. And then Darren.
Who's before?
Yeah, that's okay, go for it. Yeah.
Hi, Nick Shore here. The question probably primarily to Niels, I suppose. Where do you see the intersection between privacy and the rights associated to that, and also the requirements of primarily governments for protection of citizens which in a digital age involves certain access?
Okay, the privacy question, yes, very important. And last question for now, so you can think in a minute how you're going to respond. Was it one more?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah, last audience question, and then we'll have that question, then we'll let Sean do a little brief summing up just to ground us a little, and then the panel will get the last word responding any way they wish. But last question.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to make you aware of the human rights violations committing now in Mexico against freedom of speech. Journalists are Mexican. And, well, to make you aware about what's happening there with journalists. Well, mainly journalists who are working on internet platforms, and they're also acting as activists. So just make you aware about that. And well, my question goes for this lady who's working with the MENA region. Maybe you've been talking also about Latin America. So I've also found some similarities between that region and Latin America. Problems like, I don't know, underdeveloped economies, sometimes even economies not inclusive, governments, some abuses by large companies, extracting-based companies as well. So what are the main issues with Latin American countries, if you are aware? If you're not, maybe what are the main issues in your region because of these problems?
Okay, yes, and we do acknowledge what's going on in Mexico. It's horrendous. In many parts of the world, in fact. But there's a connection between the content, the infrastructure, the access, and we see it all coming together in a really problematic way. Think about how you're going to respond, because you're going to be finishing up with the last soundbite takeaway, so we can then segue into the reception. But Sean, I'd just like to introduce Professor Sean Cubitt, who's Professor of Film and Television, and also our joint head of department. And Sean has written many, many books, and has just released a book to do with media and the environment. And I just thank you very much, Sean. If you feel like just sort of wrapping it up, and so we can then.
I doubt I can, but I might borrow your microphone.
You may borrow my microphone, of course you may.
I'd like to be on camera. And I was saying to Niels just before we started that I regard our job in media and communications as other people create wealth or health or shelter, and our job is to create problems and bring us your solution, and we find what's wrong with it. So for me, there are a couple of really significant questions. One of them is, in this human rights, who is human? In the UN Declaration and even in the EU, it tends to be citizens. And amongst the humans that don't have rights are migrants, which has required the Declaration on Refugees. But of course, that's why nobody is a refugee. They're all asylum seekers and anything except a refugee. So that, in a sense, the question of the human is a really, possibly the most urgent question of contemporary politics, and even more so perhaps for indigenous peoples who also are largely at the fuzzier end of the lollipop, and who are also urgently trying to strive for something like indigenous rights. The second is which rights, which comes up a number of times. And there are some really baffling problems here. One of them in particular, I think, has come up very recently with the freedom of belief defense by climate change deniers, who claim that since this is not a statement of a fake alternative fact, but a belief, therefore it's protected by freedom of speech, which is a bizarre but fascinating thing. And it points to one of our other key problems, that in legal terms, in many jurisdictions, corporations are legally persons and therefore have rights that, for example, tribes who are not legal persons do not have. There's a kind of thing. And it raises a very intriguing question about non-human rights. As an environmentalist, I would like to claim environmental rights for rivers and mountains and ecologies. That's probably too broad a question, but at the same time, there are certain non-human entities that operate at very large proportions of internet traffic, notably finance trading. And the market, as a non-human or hybrid human, non-human entity, is a massive user of internet, and yet that possibly is the least governed of all things. It has an autonomy which is not legal, is not governed. It isn't even that of a corporation, it is a single corporation, but it is massively problematic and underpins a great deal of the challenges that we have. If markets have, if not rights, then power to do certain stuff, at what point do we have to start to consider non-human rights? But if we do, are the non-humans going to include things like bots that have been applied to electoral processes? Because they are, after all, freedoms of expression. They are human-machine hybrids. They are very intriguing entities. Should they be allowed? Bot farms be allowed as some kind of rights? And then there's this wonderful question that our colleague from GreenNet raises, I think is in one way, but is also enshrined in the famous IETF slogan about we don't believe in presidents, kings, or voting. We believe in a rough consensus and running code. A fantastic expression of, for those of you who've done kind of media and comms, of Habermas's public sphere. That is a perfect definition of it. But then you hit the problem that Niels refers to as the genius of the system is also its flaw, that you end up in a room full of extremely smart people. The price of entry to being engaged in this discourse is you've got to be smart. Yeah. And that really...
And rich.
Well, yes, that would help. Yes, I was really amazed at the figure of 160 some countries when you think of how many fail to be able to attend UN summits, for example, because of the prices. So 2000, I think it was around 2000 NGOs attended Tunis at the founding of the IGF. That was a very restricted number because the previous UN summit, there had been 6,000. So there is a real challenge still here about how to get this access, and whether it needs to be an organized access through NGOs, civil society organizations, or other bodies, rather than the individual, and how, since we are a deeply individualized society, especially as end users of the internet, what are the points of entry? It may be that we have to be democratic in the sense of voting, but then the ITF has got a very good reason for not believing in voting. There are many political philosophers who distrust consensus as a way of work as well. So these pose to me really fundamental questions. Not only how to do these things, but what are these things and who are the human and non-human agencies that we would like to see properly represented in a future internet.
Thanks so much, Sean. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, we have 5 minutes and we have 6 panelists. So Hanan wants to say something. Everyone wants to say something. So your challenge. This is your challenge.
3 minutes?
No. This is your challenge. Within a minute each. Because we can continue the conversation. We've got a lovely reception thanks to ICANN's generosity. All the money they make for the domain.
Okay.
Buy domain name,
So starting with Hanan. And just in your own time, but really please be brief. Takeaway soundbite, go.
All right, on engagement with ICANN. Okay, there are 2 programs that I encourage you to be part of, and that's the fellowship, which is more general, but since you're a uni student, you can try to get into the Next Gen program, which is, I think, exclusively made for students.
It's 18 to 30.
18, okay, and then you need to find where the meeting is. So ICANN has 3 meetings every year. You really need to be committed to that. So basically 2 general meetings and 1 policy forum, and I think you've got this program running, and you need to find where the meeting is to come to your region, and then you can get a fellowship to go there. On my work, you know, in the Middle East, of course there are so many similarities between the Middle East and Latin America, but we've been talking here about human rights, but we hardly touch on the business side of ICANN and what it is doing. Now, in terms of the product we're talking about, the DNS industry is worth many billions of dollars. Most of it is concentrated in North America and parts of Europe. Now, the Middle East or Latin America, they don't have the same opportunities accessing these markets for various reasons, because all of the business is concentrated in North America, and of course, there is a lack of awareness about, you know, the whole industry, because it is an industry, and we don't talk much about that. Now, a lot of deals are being made, a lot of programs are being launched by ICANN, and are maybe favoring some regions than others, like the new GTLD program, where, you know, it's basically a business registering generic, top-level domains on the internet. And what I call ICANN, basically, it's like an agent of land in the virtual life. So if you want to buy a house in the real life, you go to, an estate agent. Well, ICANN is an estate agent of the virtual, domain name. So you can, that's maybe the simple way of explaining it to the public. On forum shopping, I wanted to comment on that. This field, as you mentioned, you need, a lot of smart people, a lot of committed people, but it also feels sometimes like you're in a closed or gated community, because there is a very small number of us doing this constantly for a very long time. I think most of us here meet, at least 5 times, a year. I see these people more than I see my family members, which explains,
Which I'm very happy about.
Which explains that you really need to have long breath to explain what you're doing first, and customize it according to the audience, so you can get more people engaged in this process. So forum shopping in a positive way, I think it's good, because you have different regions with different interests. And that's why we saw, a lot of IGF, regional IGF, happening, and I think that's needed.
Okay, thanks very much. So Hanan completely just ignored my 1-minute rule, but that's all right. That's how we work. But and very important point. So moving around the table, Mark, and moving on. So
thank you. That's a kind of segue there. I think the point I just wanted to underline as a glimmer of hope, maybe, but I feel very positive about it. And that is about access and the issue of engagement for anybody who has an interest in the internet, the user, ordinary citizen, the stakeholders, the activists, and so on. And my glimmer of hope is that the model of policy governance that an increasing number of governments are now adopting, including the UK, is one of openness and transparency and engagement. And that happens through various mechanisms. And Hannah mentioned one, which is the proliferation of multi-stakeholder internet governance fora at the national and regional level. At the national level, it's about 90 now. We as UK government, we're strong advocates of that in our outreach to other governments, that they should promote that kind of interaction, engagement with stakeholders that will then feed into the global processes. So I just feel that there is a model there that governments can adopt. On safety of journalists, and including, when we say journalists, in the Council of Europe, we define that to mean anybody who is writing, netizens and bloggers and so on. That is an escalating problem. In Strasbourg, we've set up an internet platform for reporting abuse of journalists, threats to journalists. And then through the membership of the Council of Europe, which is 47 member states, we're not going to leave, by the way, the Council of Europe. We're staying with the Council of Europe. That's something. That's another glimmer of hope.
Exit is the new normal.
So anyway, the platform is an effective way and a first step by the Council to start fingering members. On how they treat the media, how they treat journalists, through exposing them. And then under the mechanism, governments have to respond. They don't all respond, but it's a step forward, I think, in protecting the safety of journalists, anybody who writes. Sorry, I've run out of time. Really.
That's all right, thank you. We've got just the last 4 panellists, and then we will proceed to continue the discussion in the foyer where they're waiting for us. So, Niels, Tatiana, Jean-Jacques, and Maria. Maybe Jean-Jacques, given... or Niels, no, I meant Niels. That's okay. I wasn't saying Jean-Jacques before you. Go.
I wasn't bold.
It's all right, don't you? What? Okay.
So, Nick. I actually think the assumption is wrong, because I do not think that government needs access to more data to safeguard security, because government never had access to as much data about citizens as they have now. And if we look at the attacks that have happened, they have not been prevented because of lack of data. It's because of lack of properly processing the data that was already there. So I think we should invest in qualified people. So a lot of time we now seem to think like more data will solve all our problems. But as many of your social scientists and people from the humanities know, it's like more data is more problems. So the more data you have, the more qualitative analysis you need to do. And I think there have also been, with the services, a lot of budget cuts or investments in technology that should fix everything. And that's this magical thinking, and it just still needs people to do the good work and make the good moral judgments. So I do not think access to data is a problem, because we still leak loads of metadata.
Okay, thanks. You got one more point?
Yeah, go on. So I tweeted, that's going to come up in a bit. We've done an RFC on human rights, in which that's going to be published soon. The draft is out, but soon it's going to be a real RFC. Outlines how we hope to do human rights impact assessments of all new RFCs. And we need help of people with us to do that. And we made a film about it, so have a look at that. The colleague from Mexico, there are great people like Derechos Digitales, R3D, and also Article 19 Mexico office, who are doing a lot of projects, bringing out lots of reports. But there again, as you say, there are enormous problems, enormous violence, enormous asymmetry, and lack of transparency. There's a lot of impunity, and we need to hold them to account, and we should work on that together.
You might have noticed people are just warming up. So, so thank you so much, Niels. Tatiana, Maria, and then Jean-Jacques.
Very briefly, I want to bring us back to a practical problem of the entry point to ICANN or to any other organization. And I believe it's not only about being smart, it's not only about having money, because you can get ICANN fellowship or next generation fellowship. For me, and I feel a bit kind of responsible for solving this problem, because I'm on the non-commercial users constituency executive committee, and we do outreach for people. Try to come to ICANN and understand what people are talking about. They are talking Chinese because there are so many acronyms. And basically, for example, when we did outreach in Copenhagen, I told people that I'm going to find them for every acronym they use, talking to people who have no idea about ICANN. And for me, it's also the problem of involvement, you know, the problem of reaching general public, because it's not only reaching general public, it's about changing our way of thinking, how we communicate to people, what kind of great job we do and they can do with us.
Thank you so much. Maria and then Jean-Jacques.
Yeah, just picking up on what Tatiana was saying, so I was giving some thought to how do you be an effective human rights activist on technical issues, particularly within an organization like ICANN. And I've got so many tips for you. But So they are. So we've talked about the entry points, Next Gen, and the fellowship program. Join the non-commercial users constituency. Or Olivier Crépin-Leblon's up there. Olivier gave away a piece of the at-large users as well. There are people. There are so many people involved, but it takes so much work to do all of these policy issues. So we need a lot of help. Don't worry about not being an expert, because if you join, certainly our constituency, we will put you in a working group. Within 2 months, you will be the first people ever to work on that incredibly detailed issue. You'll be the first people in the world ever to have worked on it. Within 2 months, you will be a group of maybe less than a dozen global experts on that nitty-gritty issue. So what we need is energy, time, and consistency. So my tips, and I know I'm
give the key with the big tip, the hot tip.
The hot tip. Okay, colour blocking, obviously, clearly. People remember you afterwards at the drinks. When the chair opens up in a thing like this, when they open up for the first question, be the person who has their question ready, right? Because if you wait 5 minutes, 15 people will have their questions, you will never get in. If you want to get involved, you have to get people's attention, right? Because attention it's basically the currency that we're using here. When you go to a meeting, if it's a physical meeting or if it's a lot of the meetings take place via the internet, kind of Adobe Connect and those kinds of things, talk to people. When I go to a meeting, if there's 6 people or 12 people or 20 people, I make sure it's my job to know the agenda of every person around that table. And you do that by chatting to people, you do that by listening, but you have to know why people are there. And it's not a question of bad faith, it's understanding why are people saying why do they have an interest, what's their point of view, what are they trying to get out of this. When you go to a meeting, you have to know what you want from that meeting, right? I mean, this is, I hope it's not too patronizing, but I think it's really, to be an effective activist, it's really helpful. Get 2 mentors. Get one mentor from your own tribe, from human rights activists, like ourselves, we're happy to do it. Get another mentor from another tribe, a business lobbyist, a government person like Mark. People, you've seen from all of us, people love to talk about their work. People love to talk about ICANN and stuff. And so, you know, I think it's hugely helpful in your career, in your activism, and in your personal development to just take advantage of the fact that people are passionate about this stuff and they want to share it. That's it.
Thank you. And Jean-Jacques, as our generous host, would you like to wrap it up in about 30 seconds?
The last tip was to be great at timekeeping. Thank you all very much. There were some great questions. One of the questions from the very back, you know, how do you get that message out? In many ways, and it's tough. This is one way. There's a few, like I noticed in London, there's some festivals that mix digital and arts and stuff like that. That's one great way. When we're here with academia, what I'd love you guys to do is you know, think about this for your research. You know, look into it, publish articles. I'm not mentioning in your syllabus, but I published in the Journal of Cyber Policy of Chatham House last year, if you want to
Oh, just send me the link.
No one reads it anyway, so you know, maybe now I'll have a couple of hits on SSRN.
People have to pay to read it, okay? So.
No, it's free. Mine is free.
Oh, really?
Yes, mine is free. Thank you very much. I'll send it to you. Anyway, so, but I'm serious, do think about that. And one thing that I'd love to have from the academic course, so to speak, is much better integration of new internet governance stuff, things like ICANN, the domain name system, in syllabuses, in curricula, for at least at master's level. I didn't have it when I did my master's. I had lots of stuff on the ITU and UNESCO in 1978. I had nothing about internet governance. Admittedly, that was a long time ago, but you know, I hope that can come in, and I think that's a really important way. I'll go to icann.org or learn.icann.org, which I've tweeted there. There's a section specifically on civil society. We've mentioned the at-large structures. They're groups that meet up at local level. Olivier here is the chair of the Internet Society England, which is one of the links with the wider global internet governance debates. They have regular meetings, so go to, is it isoc.org.uk? Just look for ISOC England. ISOC England, that's one of the local groups that you can follow. And then you all had some really great questions. And I was serious earlier, like this is seriously the making of a really good program of seminars. I'm happy to help. You want to talk about net neutrality? This is not my job anymore. It was before because there was loads of blocking and throttling of Skype. And I will be happy to put together a panel on that. and other topics. So I hope I'll be back soon.
Well, thank you so much. Just to say, there is going to be an internet governance and its discontents module offered by my dear self, with the help of my colleagues and friends from this community. That's coming up next year. The Internet Futures and Human Rights Research Hub is taking your recommendations on board. The next event is the 1st of June. We'll be looking at the Southeast Asian, Thailand, journalists, freedom of expression, journalism, media freedoms, in relationship to work that Richard McDonald has been doing there. Is that about right, Richard? So watch this space, and there's a lot more activities happening. So yes, this stuff is getting onto curricula, at least at Goldsmiths. So the reception is ready. Please continue, please join us there, eat the food, drink the drinks, and talk to our guests, because this is very, very special to have these people here at this time. So please, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Very different idea.
I don't know, what's new in life? What's new? Are you teaching a lot?
Is that probably your
kids?
Yeah.
That's great, thanks. Okay, that's good. Media comms are really good for getting students to teach. I mean, I've been I got teaching last year, but this year, next year probably will, but put up more than 10 hours. So I have to really hammer down the board to get teaching out of them. Yeah, I've got something else lined up as well next year. But yeah, so that's you'd expect your own department to help with something like that.
That's how we keep the stove burning.
And you're getting through the upgrade and everything. Yeah. It'll be the end of next year for me, but
Next year.
the end of the next academic year.
Next academic year.
17.
Yes.
The end of this academic year.
Yeah.
Okay, do talk your thing. I'm gonna smoke first, or
Sure.
Yeah? I'll be right back.
Thank you.
Just 1 second to set up.
On camera. All right. Oh, not yet. Not yet. Not started yet. It's all right.
It's been stolen actually. I'll never have one. It's been fine.
No, I'm getting you one today. You're not going right now, are you?
No, I'm very right now. This is me, by the way.
Hi. So
he's a took newbie on this, but his girlfriend essentially said he's quite interested in all this stuff. And I said, why don't we just come down and check it out? To have new faces,
yeah, so
I might get interested.
This is just to try to informing the decisions. Well, I'm going to have a wine, and I'm going to go upstairs to get
Yeah.
You're where are you from, Richard? Oh, France. We haven't got
French side, isn't it? You know,
You know everything.
You're
this happening thing, and then